Hi, good morning, everyone. I am very pleased to speak to you this morning on several topics that I'm happy about. One, Alexander Bedward, a very important figure in the history of Jamaica, and to speak about the matter of heritage, as well as Augustone, my home community. Yes, I'm from Augustone, and no, I am not a Bedwardite or a descendant of a Bedwardite. My topic today is simply Bedward, Augustone, and heritage. What I will be looking at is the various tangible items that played a role in the Bedward story and how they have fared over the last 100 years or so. History is normally the focus of humans. Humans make history, but humans also interact with the natural world and man-made items. These become our heritage. They complement, that is to say, they complete what we know. Sometimes they give additional explanations about our past and give new insight and answer many questions, as we will see. August Augustone is located in the community of, Augustone is a community located in the parish of St. Andrew. There's actually another Augustone in Bugwalk, St. Catherine, but our focus is the one in St. Andrew. It is said to be named in honor of Emancipation Day, which is the 1st of August, and that is why the community is named Augustone in memory of Emancipation Day, and it was a part of the Papine estate. It was said that former slaves, former enslaved people went to Augustone to settle. So it has been around for quite a while. And it is located in a valley between the Long Mountains to the west and the Dallas Mountains to the east, and several rivers and tributaries run through. Now we have a picture of Alexander Bedward, who is said to be born, we're not very sure. I've seen dates in 1838, 1849, 1850. We'll come back to that later, but for certain, he died in 1930. He grew up in Augustone, and Augustone became the center of his career and his ministry and his activities. So in the late 1880s, Alexander Bedward got a series of visions, and you will see that over time, a number of his activities were directed by visions. And eventually, in 1891, he was convinced of the visions that he got. And in December 1891, he started his ministry. And he started his ministry. Slide. He started his ministry at the Hope River, which he called the Healing Stream. This is what the Hope River looks like today, which is a shadow of its former glory. Now, the Hope River runs from the foothills of the Blue Mountains through Gordontown, Papine, and along Augustone out to Harbor View, where it goes out into the sea. But in December 1891, Bedward started his ministry there. He started preaching and baptizing. And he claimed that according to his vision, just as how Jesus turned water into wine, he was commissioned to turn the water of the Hope River into medicine. Hence, he called it the healing stream. This water was used to baptize people. In addition to that, the place was used as a meeting place for fasting, among other things. So as we are in this pandemic now, and we have all sorts of problems and concerns, one can only wonder what would Bedward do with the water from Augustone today. Is the solution to the pandemic in the healing stream? But whatever we think, was it the Holy Spirit? Was Bedward a con artist? Was it hydrotherapy? Whatever it was, people at the time were convinced that healing actually took place. And as a result of that, people flocked to him and to Augustone to receive healing. People were healed from all sorts of things, yaws, sore, spiritual problem. And the water was often blessed by him and bottled and sold. So in a sense, we could say Alexander Bedward of Augustone was a pioneer in the bottled water industry. in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, medical attention was limited, very little medicine, etc., medicines and medical professionals. And as a result of this, many of the poor were unable to access medical treatment. So Bedward's coming and his ministry through the healing stream was actually a godsend, so to speak, and people flocked him. But where exactly did the baptisms and the healing took place? I have been told by persons who were around at the time, or small children, that it took place in the river. Some people said it was at Bury. Bury is a spring that is practically in the riverbed of Auguststone. You see this massive stone on the screen, which indicate that is what we call Bury in Auguststone. It's a big stone, maybe like 12 feet high or something like that. And at the bottom of the stone is a spring. The water literally comes out of the rock. So much so that when I was a child, I thought that was the rock that Moses struck and that water came forth of. And it still runs out. Now, we don't know if it's the regular, it runs out into the Hope River. But we are not sure exactly if it was at the foot of Bury or further, but it doesn't matter. We know it was the Hope River that was the healing stream and the center of Bedward's ministry. Now, following Bedward's arrest and detention in 1921, 100 years ago today, baptisms did continue with his grandsons who eventually took over. But after a while, by the 1940s, 50s, fewer and fewer persons were baptized. And as a result of that, because there were less persons entering the church began to decline. And it's fair to say that the church has died with so many of the members dead. So the healing stream actually drew the anger and the attention of the medical establishment, who dismissed him as a fraud and said that he was deceiving the poor, ignorant masses of Auguststone and indeed Jamaica. And so this was a big thing. Actually, in as early as 1895, there was a Gleaner article on January 24, 1895. Somebody wrote in the Gleaner, "It will be gratifying intelligence to the public that the firm actions of the authorities in arresting Bedward has a most salutary effect. The Mona water fraud has received its death blow." This was the anticipated of its leader. So in 1895, Bedward had some legal problems, and people were celebrating because they were saying he's a fraud using the river to deceive people. But we see that after 1895, the numbers grew exponentially. But after Bedward, as I say, the number of baptisms by the church declined. And of course, the water was used for different domestic and other purposes. Every real boy from Auguststone has been to the river to swim at least once. And indeed, other churches, right up until the 1990s and perhaps into the new millennium, other churches began to use the river for baptism. So as a child growing up in Auguststone, it wasn't strange for a Sunday morning to hear people going to the river beating drums and tambourine, the churches that we consider to be revivalists, going down to the river to be baptized. And these were not churches from Auguststone. They were from all over the country who were being baptized there. But it was not just what we would call these fringe churches that were being baptized there. I have witnessed the Roman Catholic Church in Auguststone having a baptism. One Saturday morning, we were told about this, and I went to witness it not only because the Roman Catholic Church is an established church, but because we were always told that the Roman Catholics sprinkled instead of baptized, and so we actually went. So the point is, it has been used since Bedward for baptism. Today, the Hope River is a shadow of itself. In the 1950s, the Mona Reservoir was built, and much of the water was rerouted via an aqueduct and that sends the water from the Hope River into the Mona Reservoir. And so, you know, we don't have as much water. There is actually the overflow that continues into the river. Then, of course, there is pollution and many other problems. In addition to that, Bedward has been condemned. Water still flows, but because of the presence of so many pit latrines around it, it is no longer safe for drinking purposes. But the water looks very nice, very clean, very, very pretty. In 1894, Bedward received a vision to begin to have a physical church, and so he established a temple. And so he built this from the sand, with sand and stone from the river, Hope River, and it was said to be built on lands belonging to his wife. In addition, the church was said not to have any steel or any center columns. We'll come back to that later. It was 50 feet wide and 109 feet long. It was a two-story structure, which is very interesting. Even after 100 years after, none of the churches in Augustown today, and there are several, have two-story buildings. To be built in Augustown, or maybe any place near Augustown. It had 24 arch windows, 5 arch doors, and inside there were 8 wooden beams which held up the balcony. No church in Augustown today has a balcony. And it was built in, as I said, in a general area where Bedward called it Union Camp. Right, so it was the headquarters for his church, not just for Augustown, but several branches across Jamaica and in Panama, Costa Rica, as well as Cuba. So it was organized in 1894, and it was actually completed in 1905. But as we will see, and that is a closer look at the stonework and the year that he got the vision to start it. However, we see that by 1951, the church was damaged. Well, by 1907, it was damaged by the earthquake. And by 1951, with Hurricane Charlie, it was totally destroyed. The roof collapsed and pretty much it was damaged. So what eventually happened was that the wood and many of the things were brought to the side, and a small shed was built, and that's where the faithful continued to worship from the 1950s up until the 1980s, when that shed too was destroyed. And so by the this is inside the church. People actually play football in there now, sacrilege. But we see that by the 1980s, this is Bedward's house. It was along the side of the church. It actually, from the veranda, you could see the church close by, but it's no longer in existence. It has been demolished for development. But the church, Bedward's church, and the wider community around it was a commune. The people there came together and worked. They found jobs. They had skills. People did farming, tailoring, baking, dressmaking, shoe repair, and a number of other things. They washed and a number of things. And so they earned a living. So it was not just a spiritual movement. People found work and so forth at the church. Right. Today in Augustown, the area where the church is known as Churchyard. And in 1999, the Jamaica National Heritage Trust declared it a national monument. 100 years ago, Bedward was brought to the courthouse, and this courthouse was in Halfway Tree. He intended to march to Kingston, but it was diverted to Halfway Tree Courthouse. So 100 years ago today, this place was a buzz of activity with the arrest of Bedward and his many followers who decided to march with him. Right. Now, of course, he was no stranger to the court system. And I would say every true revolutionary has had an acquaintance with the court system. In January 1895, Bedward was arrested on charge of sedition, and he was brought to the court, and he was sentenced to a lunatic asylum, but he was released on technicality. So they were after Bedward from the 1890s, not just 1921. So this is what the courthouse looked like, on the day, with a number of persons. Well, that's what it looked like in 1901, same building, and that's what it looked like on a day. The courthouse itself actually has a history of its own. It was completed in 1807. That's over 200 years ago. It was completed in 1807 and actually replaced a courthouse which was there in a half a tree before. And of course, the court system is an arm of the government. And at the time, the government was a colonial administration. So essentially, the courthouse was there to reinforce white power. And so it was at the courthouse, vestry meetings were held. When I say vestry meetings, I mean the precursor to the current local government system. They actually met literally in the vestry of the Anglican Church, and it was moved eventually to courthouses and other places. And so it was also the place where former enslaved persons received their certificate of freedom. And by the 1920s, after Bedward was tried there, a new courthouse was built in half a tree, and as a result of that, it was no longer used for court. In World War II, it was used as the Imperial War Censorship Building, and eventually after World War II, the Junior Center used it, the National Dance Theatre Company used it, and in 1985, it was repaired and it was declared a national monument by the Jamaica National Heritage Trust. I am told that it is now used for Sunday school by the St. Andrew Parish Church, which is just right next door to it. Right, so on October the 8th, 1930, Bedward died peacefully at the Bellevue Hospital. And I'm very happy to say this because as a child growing up, we heard that Bedward attempted to fly and died as a result of injuries he sustained from this. I often heard a broken neck, but we are told that he died peacefully at the Bellevue Hospital in 1930. And so he's buried, yes, the slide is right, at Duppy Lane. We in Augustown call the street Duppy Lane, but if you write a letter to there, it won't go there because that's not the formal name. It is actually Bryce Lane, and it's a real place. So the Bedward Cemetery is on Bryce Lane. We grew up calling it Burying Ground. That's what we call it, but much, much later, it was rechristened appropriately, the Bedward Cemetery, and it was actually lands that the church acquired for this purpose, to bury its members, right? So Bedward was actually buried beside his wife, Elizabeth, who predeceased him in October 1930, exactly 1 month before him, right? Now, the Bedward Cemetery is closed. Now, and this is what it looks like. It's actually overgrown. It never used to look like this back in the 80s. The cemetery, interestingly, was a busy place because it was a shortcut from Bryce Hill Road to Manley Avenue, named after Norman Manley, and people would pass through night and day. So it was a busy place in addition to being a burial ground. But as I said, over time, things have changed. Now, right. So this is actually Bedward's grave as it exists now. This picture was taken last year. And as a child growing up, it didn't quite look like this. It used to be higher out of the ground, and it had the shape of a barrel or a cylinder. You could actually sit on it almost like a horse. But over time, it has been going down. Now, and this, of course, is his wife, Elizabeth Bedward. No, the slide with Bedward's grave revealed that he actually was 82 when he died, which would put his date of birth to about 1849. So, in a sense, this tangible object is giving us some more specific clues on information that we are uncertain about. So by that we can establish that. But in addition to that, the headstone of Elizabeth Bedward also shows that she was older than him. She died at age 86, and as we said, she predeceased him 1 month prior to his own death. Right. So, in a sense, we're learning. Now, I've spent some time actually thinking about this Bedward phenomenon for a while. We have a picture of the screen on the screen here with, in 1996, that's me standing there looking at Bedward's tomb. But we can see last week when I went in 2021, you could actually see it is much lower. The problem is that where it was built is in the way that storm water normally flows with all the debris and anything. So the grave actually appears to be sinking, or it is that the debris is rising. We actually had to dig our way through to find Elizabeth Bedward's headstone. And you know, that in a normal scheme of things, that would be about 1.5 feet high. But now it is practically covered. I went last week just to look at something again, and I couldn't find it. It is covered with debris, dirt, and silt. But Bedward is buried among his closest lieutenants and people bearing the names such as Burke and Mackenzie, and a number of other individuals who were closer to him. So those who were closer to him were buried nearest to him. Now, so how does Augustine remember Bedward? We see that Augustine honors Bedward with place names. One of the streets in Augustine has been named after Bedward, Bedward Crescent. Many of the streets in Augustine are named after months of the year. May Lane, April Way, June Road, July Road, Augustine Road. But we have a Bedward Crescent also in Augustine, to the bottom of Augustine. There is also a Bedward Gardens, which is across from Augustine proper, an informal community which has now been called Bedward Gardens. Many people still refer to it as Over the River or Simple River, but it's now named after Alexander Bedward, because that was where he conducted many of his fastings, etc., etc. And at the entrance of Augustine, and the JNHT assisted with this a number of years ago, there is a sign welcoming people to Augustine and educating the public about Alexander Bedward. Now, of course, in addition, we see a number of other things coming from Bedward in terms of people that are not necessarily complimentary. People originally from Augustine were mocked and ridiculed because of the fact that Augustine was the home of Bedward. And so, you know, sometimes Augustine people are the butt of jokes, and many people assume that because you're from Augustine, you believe in Bedward, etc., etc. But it is not necessarily so. So, in closing, I would just like to appeal to us to pay more attention to the physical objects that reveal insights into our past. In addition to that, I am very disappointed to know or not to know of any physical item associated with the church, like a church bench or Bedward's Bible, even a foot of his shoes or his robe or anything that we can show people. Thankfully, he made a building that we can live, that we can see. And finally, I would say the biggest contribution of Bedward to Augustine was the increase in the population. Bedward brought attention to Augustine. A number of persons left from all over the island and came to Augustine and never returned home for all types of reasons. And as a result of this, the population of Augustine grew significantly. And of course, he contributed to this. And as a result of this, Augustine has been able to play its small part in the development of Jamaica. Thank you very much for your time. I hope you have been edified by this presentation on Augustine and its heritage, as well as Alexander Bedward. Thank you.